I live in the middle of nowhere, but an old woman keeps knocking on my door. By Advo. I live in the middle of nowhere, West Virginia. My lonely farmhouse is surrounded by acres upon acres of sprawling cow pasture. It's been just me out here for going on 4 years now, unless you count the occasional stray cat coming to my door for the odd piece of bologna. I don't get visitors, I don't get solicitors, I don't get Jehovah's Witnesses breaking down my door or Mormons asking me if I'd like to try their magic underwear. Yes, I didn't get visitors until last Thursday, when I was watching one of the few channels that come in on my old box TV. It takes a lot to unglue me from my recliner, but a knock at my kitchen door startled me so bad that I bolted up immediately. I crept through the archway that led into my kitchen. The sight of her through the door's thin glass window stopped me dead in my tracks. Through the sheer white curtain, I could see her staring straight at me. She rapped on the door again, rattling the glass. So much for hiding from company. I glanced up at the quietly ticking clock on the wood paneling. 10:17 p.m. I heaved a sigh as I trudged towards the door. My nose scrunched at the sickening smell of butterscotch and Ben Gay that wafted through the cracks in the doorframe. The brass of the doorknob was oddly cool under my touch, like a warning. But I opened the door, just an inch. The damp night air seeped into my kitchen, and so did her stench. This old woman had a bent-over frame, like she should have been shuffling around with a walker or a cane. But there was none. I grit my teeth, staring into her sagging lower eyelids that allowed me to see under her gummy eyeballs. I couldn't help but ask, "How are you here?" Her shaking hands smoothed over the mud that marred her floral dress. Under her decaying fingernails were dirt and splinters like she clawed her way up my driveway. She responded with a voice as sickeningly sweet as the butterscotch scent surrounding her. "I walked." I glanced behind her and down my steep dirt road that stretched for miles. "No, you didn't. Go back to wherever the hell you came from." I slammed the door in her face. It's not one of my proudest moments. I stared her down as I clicked the lock on my door and flicked off the kitchen lights. She didn't knock again. The rest of the night was normal. I sat in my recliner watching Gunsmoke reruns until I felt inclined to go to bed. I didn't let the thought of the old woman plague me for one whole day. My daily routine mostly consisted of drinking stout black coffee at my kitchen table, then migrating to my porch to watch the cows and snap peas. It's too simple a life for some. But if you inherit an old farmhouse and a fortune from your late grandparents, then you may criticize me. In the month of August, the sun here sets around 8:30. I glanced outside the window just above my sink, and the sky was a deep blue, with just a hint of the yellow disappearing behind the mountains. I had occupied myself with baking bread that evening, a decent enough hobby, and it kept me fat and happy. I sprinkled flour on my rolling pin before working out the dough on the countertop. My eyes tended to wander with such a quiet hobby, and I'd always find myself glancing out that sink window. I loved to watch the calves nestle close to their mamas for the night, and that night was no exception, even as I watched a particularly odd cow, short and stubby with movements more like an injured dog than a heifer. I've stopped rolling out the dough and squinted my eyes. The other cows were terrified, letting out moos of horror as they hurried away from that one. All the cattle on this property were Angus, pure black, but this one had a head of stark white. Perhaps it had gotten loose from some neighboring property miles away. I thought this issue could wait until morning, till I heard it moo. The moo was all wrong. Too high-pitched, too mucusy, too butterscotch. I grabbed a rifle I had propped next to the unused wooden stove and stormed out onto my porch. This heifer was standing on 2 feet now, watching me. Though it was a heifer of a different sort. An old woman. It was somewhat dark, but I could see her crepe paper skin and distant eyes. She was wearing a black gown now, dragging against the dewy grass below. Against my better judgment, I yelled at her in warning. "You'd better start hobbling the fuck out of here." She tilted her head at me, as though she was some poorly trained puppy. Then she was on her hands and knees again, launching herself towards me. She closed most of the distance between us before I could even blink. I should have shot her, but my heart sank to my stomach, and all I could think to do was run back inside. I latched my door and watched out the narrow window as she slowly stood again, just outside the threshold. Placing a sweaty palm against the glass, her rampant breath cast a heavy fog on the other side. It took me an hour to catch my own breath afterward. Even after this long, I still can't understand what happened. I taped a trash bag over the glass on the door that night. I checked the locks on my windows and my cellar door. I slept with my rifle propped up against the garish floral wallpaper of my bedroom. The wallpaper itself reminded me so much of that hag's dresses. All I could do was scrunch my eyes shut and pray for sleep to take me. The next morning, I admit, I was rattled. Looking in the dusty mirror of my dresser, heavy bags enveloped my under eyes. I scrubbed my hands over my face, hoping that would somehow wipe the delirium of a restless night from me. This old woman was animalistic. I couldn't help but think what would have happened if she caught me the night before. I prayed she had gone away, but I would be prepared for her arrival tonight regardless. But I still had some responsibilities. I forced myself downstairs that morning, frying a few lackluster scrambled eggs for myself. I filled an old Stanley thermos with my strong coffee, and opened a junk drawer to reach for my late grandfather's rusty Bowie knife. Then, I cautiously opened the kitchen door and glanced out on my porch. No sign of the old woman. I wasn't even certain this old broad would be as terrifying in the daytime. I decided I needed to check on the cattle, hence my excursion outside. I walked up the side of the grassy hill, glancing at each cow as I went for anything out of the ordinary. They were all fine, grazing as usual, and somewhat agitated by my presence. It wasn't until I reached the crest of the hill and looked down that I realized not all of the cattle had been left unharmed. Keeled over on its side, a bull lay dead, flies already starting to swarm and surround it. Wrapped around the bull's neck was a lacy black gown, pulled tight enough to kill. I shuddered, giving a brief glance all around me to make sure the hag wasn't watching. Then I stooped low, doing my best to lift up the dead cow's head. I turned it a certain way and heard the telltale pop of a broken neck. I tried not to dwell on it, the absurdity of a little old lady breaking a bull's neck with her discarded dress. I also tried not to think about an old woman running around naked on my property. The rest of my evening was consumed with moving the bull to our bone pit with my tractor. I dropped the bull on the bones of the rest of the cattle from many years past, and lugged over my bag of quicklime to sprinkle on its corpse. The smell of death around here carries for miles when left unchecked. I eventually settled down enough to sit in the rocking chair on my porch. The cicadas were unusually loud that day. I nursed a glass of sweet tea as though it were something stronger and gawked at the greens and yellows of the August trees. August was a slow death. Blink and the leaves would be gone, fall would creep in, and that would be the natural order of things. The rest of my day was relatively normal, though I kept an extra watchful eye on my surroundings. Then it was time for me to turn in for the night once more. It was 11:49 p.m. The old woman had not dared knock yet, and part of me thought perhaps she'd given up. I felt the chill of the damp summer night settle in around me as I lay in bed. I pulled up my grandmother's itchy Afghan blankets and stared at the water-damaged ceiling. I felt wrong that night. I knew why, but perhaps I didn't have the guts to admit it. My eyes were heavy, yet my mind refused to let me shut them. Without moving my head, my eyes darted around the walls, to the poorly done taxidermy mounts and deer horns, to my grandparents' wedding photos from back in the 60s, to where Grandma's dark velvet robe still hung on a nail in the corner of the room. There was an entire wall dedicated to crucifixes of all shape and size. This house didn't have anything from myself in it, save for a drawer full of clothing. In some way, the house still belonged to them. Still smelled like Grandpa's aftershave. Still had Grandma's energy and presence somewhere within it. Every time I walked into that kitchen, I half expected her to be leaning over the stove, stirring a skillet of gravy. I had just begun to drift off to sleep when a thunderous bang echoed outside. I jolted up, chucking my blankets off and slipping my chilled feet onto the floor. I snatched my rifle from where it leaned against the wall and slipped out into the hallway. I was incredibly cautious not to make much noise as I slinked down the wooden staircase. My left hand braced against the wood paneling as I went down, careful not to knock any family portraits off the wall. I took the final step down and felt the yellow shag carpet of my living room beneath my feet. I took a quick scan. The ceiling fan steadily hummed as I glanced around. My twin tan recliners sat empty, and the plaid couch against the far wall was the same. The ancient Magnavox television was off, just how I left it. The glass of milk I left on the dark oak coffee table was untouched. Nothing was out of place here, so I crept forward, raising my rifle slightly. I was creeping up on the archway in the left wall that led into the kitchen. I took a deep breath in, then whipped around the corner. I expected to see her face staring back at me, but the pane of glass on my door was still covered, and the room was empty. Dark. I refused to be fooled by her. Just because she wasn't in my home, it didn't mean she wasn't nearby. I turned my head to the right, glancing out the window above the sink. I saw no cattle, only empty, rolling hills of grass. I laid my rifle up against a cupboard before peeling back the garbage bag taped over the door. I peered out into the night. My porch was as I left it that afternoon. I waited for probably 20 minutes, just listening. I was frozen to that spot in the kitchen until I deemed it safe to go back to bed. My breathing was unusually heavy that night. I remember feeling this weight on my chest, pushing down on my straining lungs. I forced my eyes shut and tried to relax just enough for sleep to take me. I calmed my breath to a steady, shallow rhythm. It was only then did I notice that I was not the only one breathing in here. My ears locked onto the dog-like panting in the darkened corner of my room. My heart thudded in my throat, blood draining from my face. I debated not opening my eyes, just laying there and playing dead. But I couldn't. I cracked my eyes open. The corner was black. The breathing grew, excited, hungry. My eyes adjusted too slowly, but I could see a slash of yellowed teeth through the blackness. I could see her gummy, clouded eyeballs, and they were looking straight at me. I clutched the blankets around me like I was holding on for dear life. I willed myself to look away from her, to snap my head over towards my rifle. It was supposed to be propped on the wall. Supposed to be. I left it downstairs. I didn't know what to do. I was shaking so hard my teeth chattered. It took me about a half an hour for my heavy tongue to form words. What the hell do you want from me? She didn't answer me. She didn't move the whole night. Her breath did eventually slow to something more contented, like a purring cat. I heard the cuckoo clock chime for each hour throughout the night. 12, 1, 2, 3, 4. I didn't sleep, just stared at her as she stared at me. It wasn't until 6 a.m. that the eerie smile was instantly wiped from her face. Her countenance turned blank, spaced out, Then she shuffled over to the door, and I heard her slowly walk down the stairs. The steps creaked and popped like her weary old bones. I am not ashamed to admit I cried after she left. I released a sob I'd been holding in all night. Part of me thought if I made too much noise, she'd launch herself at me. I was unsteady on my feet as I rose. I tore open the bottom dresser drawer and hastily threw on some clothes. I was about to set foot out into my hall when the wall of crucifixes caught my eye. I carefully removed one and clutched it to my chest as I walked downstairs. It did not deter her. She sat across from me at my kitchen table that morning. She was eating stale cereal I didn't even know I had. The woman couldn't seem to close her mouth quite right. I couldn't take my eyes away as milk seeped through the jagged gaps in her teeth and dribbled back into the bowl. Needless to say, I lost my appetite for breakfast as I watched her slurp the same disgorged milk back into her mouth for a half hour. She made herself at home, stoking up the wood stove until it was 1,000 degrees inside. Then she took up residency in my grandfather's old recliner for the rest of the day. I tried to talk to her a few times, to urge and beg and plead her to go. She didn't listen. She didn't even respond. I was going to kill her today. I just had to work myself up to it. That evening after supper, she had occupied herself with looking through month-old newspapers. She would raise a shaking, withered hand to her mouth before slobbering all over it. She used her saliva to wet her fingers and turned to the next page. She occupied herself with the obituaries for a while before moving to the crossword puzzle. She was stuck on 6 down, an 8-letter word synonymous with forever. I knew the answer, but it got caught in my throat. Eventually, she used a blotchy ink pen to circle job advertisements. Positions for funeral home attendants, meat cutters, butcherers. Her blank eyes met mine when she slid the paper in front of me. Somehow, that was the final straw. I pushed back from the table, my chair scraping against the floorboards. I crossed the room for my rifle, right where I'd left it. I knew it was loaded. My hands found the stock, and I nestled it in the crook of my armpit. I grimaced as I clicked the safety off. There was no going back from this. I leveled the barrel at the back of her stark white head. My breath rattled in my lungs as I tightened my grip, then squeezed the trigger. The gunshot echoed in the confines of my kitchen, making my ears sing. It dazed me. I sat the rifle on the countertop, taking a few steps closer to inspect her. Bits of brain and fragments of skull pelted themselves against the table. She lay face down, arms splayed out in front of her. The hole in the back of her head oozed out a bloody sludge. I couldn't deal with more death today. Shaking and trying to pull myself together, I stumbled into the living room. I plopped down on the plaid couch, sinking down into it. I closed my eyes and heaved a sob. I would clean her up later, I thought. But that's not the worst part. The worst part was she was back an hour later, bent over my stove. She was gumming on a ladle of cream of mushroom soup, just enough for her. There was a vague whisper of a wound on her forehead. I watched it closely. It seemed to fade with each passing second. I'm afraid I haven't been entirely honest with anyone reading this up until this point. I am afraid of the old woman, not because she's found her way in my house, but because she is alive in the first place. I say this with complete conviction. I buried this sagging old bitch under my floorboards on August 1st. I remember. She hobbled up my driveway with purpose that very first time. I watched her from my porch. Maybe she had dementia or Alzheimer's. Maybe she was lost and her car broke down. I didn't think much of it until she sat down in the rocking chair on my porch, pretending like the place was hers. She didn't say too much to me for the entire 10 minutes I questioned and threatened her. Then, by way of greeting, she said, "Irene and Harlan used to live here." My grandparents' names. I leaned against the peeling white post of my porch and gave her a quizzical look. "Yeah, used to. What business is it of yours?" She really looked at me for the first time then. There wasn't much life in her eyes, and that made my stomach drop. She pointed a wrinkled talon at me. "You weren't very good to them." I scoffed. "I took care of my grandparents for years when the rest of my family would have had them thrown in a nursing home." The old woman leaned back, fishing a piece of strawberry candy out of a dress pocket. "How did they die?" A droplet of sweat rolled off my brow, and I squinted my eyes at her odd question. Grandpa Harlan was so heartbroken about Grandma's cancer, his heart couldn't take it. The old woman hummed in consideration, popping the candy in her mouth. I cringed at the smacking sounds her ancient mouth made around it. Then she spoke again. "I find it unusual that neither of them had a funeral." I cleared my throat awkwardly. "It just wasn't in the cards financially," I said, doing my damnedest to feign ignorance. "They were cremated," I clarified. She made an overt display of turning around, gawking at the farmhouse and the land surrounding it. "You sure gained plenty from their passing." I grew tired of her catty statements. "Listen, I'm exhausted, and I don't like company. I don't know how you made it up here, or why, but you'd better be getting back. If you need to use the landline phone, that's fine, but otherwise, leave." Her swinging jowls drooped impossibly lower at that. She grunted as she pushed herself out of the rocking chair, stumbling back onto her feet. Now face to face with her, I tried to be casual as I stepped away from her and towards my kitchen door. "Have a good day," she said, her face now as neutral as ever. I breathed a little easier for just a moment as I turned my doorknob. Then the words she said next stopped me in my tracks. "I just don't think under that old oak tree is where I would have chosen to bury them." I whipped around to look at her, my heart sinking to my stomach. "What did you just say?" Her vile lips looked like two slimy earthworms as she said, "Irene and Harlan deserved better than this. Better than the likes of you." I could feel the blood rush to my face. "You old fucking windbag, you don't know what you're talking about. Go home, now." She smiled at me then, wicked, with too many teeth. "This will be my home someday. I rather like it here." The way she looked at me made something under my skin buzz with rage and made my stomach weak with nausea. I vaguely remember feeling the cold steel of my grandfather's old Bowie knife strapped to my side, and that was it. I don't know what overtook me. I am not some murderer. But she was dead, and I was covered in her blood, and I buried her under my floorboards. I peeled up the disgusting yellow shag carpet in my living room, through the layers of plywood, then to the original wood. I kept going until I hit dirt, and I dug her a shallow grave with my bare hands. She didn't stink up the place. I covered her body with quicklime. Plenty to go around on a farm. Nobody wants to smell the corpse of a bloated cow, in either sense. I didn't know what she meant when she said it was her home now. I don't know why something like this would happen to me. Perhaps it's divine justice, or cruel and unusual punishment. That first time meeting her was the only time she spoke. She tormented me then, and now she torments me with utter, maddening silence. She torments me in many ways. It's always hot in here now. She keeps feeding the wood stove. It hadn't seen a flame since my grandfather tended to it. Now it never rests. It's so hot, but my body betrays me and won't allow me to sweat. So I must endure the feverish burn against my face and body at all times. She could go outside. Why was she allowed outside? I am stuck in this house. Some unseen force is trapping me between these four walls. I feel suffocated, like some invisible hands are pressing a full force against my throat and lungs if I even attempt to step out onto my porch. It is unbearable, the suffocation. My vision turns black, and every primal urge inside my brain is fighting to keep me alive. So I give up. I come back inside. I watch James Arness shoot another man on TV. The hag steals the remote. She turns the volume down just low enough to where I can't quite hear what they're saying. Eventually, my appetite disappeared. The food in my cabinets dwindled every time I ripped them open. The old woman was eating it all. But somehow, no matter how much time passed, there was always enough for her. But it didn't matter. The thought of eating made me sick after a while, until the concept of hunger became a numbness in the pit of my stomach. I was turning into a ghost, each of my functions as a human decaying and then fading away entirely. Yesterday, I had enough. I forced myself to walk outside, to be suffocated. I never felt so scared, so helpless in my entire life. Trying to gasp for air, but nothing comes. There's no feeling like it. But I withstood it, in hopes of finally resting like my grandparents under the oak tree. By all means, I was dead. I remember this blackness, soupy and swirling around me, engulfing my sense of self. It was a comforting breeze across my stagnant river of a body. It filled my nostrils, then my lungs, and seeped into my veins. I remember thinking, nothing. I've always been an overthinker, yet my brain was just still. I was at peace. Or so I thought. Then this morning, I woke up under the floorboards, coughing out lumps of warm August dirt and wriggling worms. I could hear the staticky TV mutter. I could hear the hag sucking on a piece of candy, and the wrapper crumple to the floor. I tried taking a mouthful of the dirt, choking myself on it. I always woke up. Terror struck my heart each time, an overwhelming terror of life itself. I tore my way out of the floor, lifting up the loose carpet. I was panting, and dirt clung to me as I trudged towards my recliner. The old woman didn't look at me once, just smacked her tongue around the candy and stared blankly at the TV. As time crawled on, the old woman made herself more at home. One night, I forced myself to lie down in my bed for a dreamless sleep. Then I heard her flat feet patter up the steps and across the bedroom floor. The bed dipped and the mattress springs squealed. I bolted up, but her movements were not so frantic. She sat down slowly, calculating. Her back was to me at first. Then she mustered the strength to swing her swollen legs over the bed. Her shaking hand pushed me so I fell flat on my back. I took a deep, wavering breath. She laid down next to me, curling into my body and draping her arm over my heaping chest. Her thin skin was so cold. I tried not to gag. Her arm was full of liver spots, and I swore they reeked of dead cow. Wiry, spindly gray hairs poked through each one of them. Her putrid breath was oppressive against my face, sticky in my lungs. I could hardly breathe. She laid there, staring at me. I thought she was incapable of sleep until wet snores escaped her throat. She fell asleep with her eyes open. I extracted myself from the bed that night and sat on the couch until I could calm down. If the old bitch wanted the bed, she could take it. I didn't need it anymore. I wasn't sure I even needed sleep anymore. At 6 a.m., I attempted to kill her again. I wrapped a dish towel around her throat. She wheezed. She writhed. I didn't let go until I heard her windpipe snap. It was a long morning. I hauled her body downstairs, tossing her corpse outside the threshold of the house and onto the porch. A naive part of me thought that would banish her for good. But a few hours later, I heard her ragged, pained breathing coming from my bedroom. When I found her, she was on her bony knees, throwing out all of my belongings from my lone drawer. I let her. I hadn't been able to stop anything she'd done so far. She replaced my few items of clothing with her own floral dresses and some collectible salt and pepper shakers wrapped carefully in newspaper. Days faded into weeks, and I etched each calendar day away with a slash of dried Sharpie. Then came August 31st. I was glued to my kitchen chair that day, just staring at the calendar taped on the side of the refrigerator. I was shaking. I would have been biting my fingernails, but I discovered after a few weeks that they didn't grow back now. The hag occupied herself with something upstairs. I didn't even care enough to see what, even if it was outside of her regular routine. The occasional thud or bang would echo down the staircase, but it didn't move me from my spot. I sat there till it was dark, just listening to the refrigerator hum and the wood stove crackle. My vision tunneled, fixated on the calendar only to occasionally dart to the clock. 11:59 p.m. It was almost midnight, and it was almost September. My jaw clamped down tight, grinding my teeth together. I prayed and I prayed and I prayed. I'd never prayed before my grandparents died. Only after. I prayed not to get caught. Now I pray for the hag to release me. My mouth went bone dry as I listened to the clock tick the final seconds of August. My leg bounced frantically. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I thought I'd been successful in leaving August behind. Then all the lights in the house went dark. I was sitting in the pitch black, the warm wood of the kitchen chair underneath me. My refrigerator went quiet. The TV snapped off. Hot air puffed against my face like a foul breath. I didn't move. I kept my eyes where I thought the calendar was. I knew exactly what was going to happen. I knew it, and it didn't make it any less devastating. After an agonizing minute, I heard power hum back through the wiring in the house. A lone light bulb stuttered on overhead. My jaw quivered as I looked at the calendar. My Sharpie markings were gone. It was blank. August 1st. It was August 1st. When I could beckon myself to move, I pointed my rifle at the roof of my mouth and pulled the trigger. The momentary darkness that washed over me like tides on a beach supplied me little comfort this time. I woke up, my tongue laved over a mushy pit where the roof of my mouth should have been. My hair and scalp shifted on their own volition as the top of my skull weaved itself back together, second by second. I felt no pain. God save me, I felt no pain. The month of August was eternity, and I was stuck in it. I've come to terms with the fact that I'm not afraid of the old woman. I'm afraid of said eternity. And I'm stuck with both in a house that smells like mothballs and butterscotch, with a TV that only plays old westerns, and with crocheted blankets that smell like death. I am prohibited from truly living my life. Yet, I cannot die. This is my eternity. So I urge you, please take great care and great caution. Never open up when an old woman knocks on your door. Thank you guys for listening to this story by Advo. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe and come back for more. I will link the story in the description for you to check it out for yourself. I always appreciate your support, and as always, until next time, goodbye.